take you off for a second and then I'll bring it back on. Hello and welcome to another episode of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles, where we prefer truth over narrative and principles over personalities. Glad you guys are joining me today, and I have another fire gift for you, and we're going to be talking about what's in the news right now, critical race theory. But before we get started, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. If you haven't already subscribed to my channel, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell so that you'll be notified whenever I upload a new video or whenever I go live. Also want to give a shout out to my sponsor, LibertyNation.com is a proud sponsor of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles. Check out LibertyNation.com for all your conservatarian news, original articles and analysis, videos, podcasts, LN Radio, and their signature TV program, The Conservative Five, all on LibertyNation.com. Conservative news where truth matters. So today with me, I have Jenny Beth Martin, who is the honorary chairman of Tea Party Patriots Action. And we are going to have a conversation about critical race theory, specifically as it pertains to the classroom. So thanks for joining me. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Good, good. Now, before we get into the meat, could you just tell us a little bit about you and Tea Party Patriots Action?
Yeah, so I am the co-founder of Tea Party Patriots, a national Tea Party organization that began back in 2009. We support grassroots activists and grassroots groups and help them organize, help them coalesce with one another, and then coalesce with other national organizations so they can be effective when it comes to our three core values: personal freedom, economic freedom, and a debt-free future. We've been doing this for 12 years now, and as critical race theory, and really even before critical race theory became such a big deal with schools, getting schools open once they closed last March has been a personal passion of mine and our organizations. And we've been working on school related issues since last March, and it has evolved now into working on critical race theory, among other issues at schools.
Okay, gotcha. Now, one of the things that I saw is that your organization has created a toolkit to help parents who are concerned about their kids being indoctrinated. And of course, I mean, this obviously would apply to critical race theory, which we'll be talking about, but there are other forms of indoctrination as well. So can you tell us a little bit about some of the tools that this toolkit provides?
So we have two different toolkits that people would be interested in. One is about how to approach your school board meeting, how to research your school board, how to make a difference with your local school board. And we don't address any specific issues in that. We just kind of approach as a template how to go about engaging with your school board. Then we also have one called the United We Stand how-to guide. And that guide it's United We Stand for content of character and against critical race theory. Last year in May of 2020, as Black Lives Matter began taking the actions that they began taking, and then some of what they, maybe not what they were doing, but activists who were out claiming to be sort of part of Black Lives Matter, whether they were or not, I have no idea. As those things devolved into riots, we started saying, as a country, we have to stand united. If we're not united and we start dividing, we're going to run into a lot of problems. So we've taken the approach for how to deal with these kind of issues is a United We Stand for the content of character, very much like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said. And I'm from Atlanta, so I always have respected and tried to live my life in a way that he would feel like the sacrifices he made were worthwhile. So in this toolkit, we have information about what is critical race theory, what is diversity, equity, and inclusion, because so many schools and businesses around the country are implementing critical race theory, and they're doing it under the guise of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We have ways to talk about this. We really try to explain what it is, have ways to talk about it. And then we have sample letters to the editor, sample letters to elected officials. We have ways to make phone calls to your elected officials, sort of sample scripts on it, social media posts that you may want to post, how to do a sign waving event about it. And it's a reference guide for people to use so that they really understand the issue and can begin to take action. And I think that we're going to wind up making this even bigger or add additional volumes to it as we learn more information and do more research.
Good. I mean, what I like about what you just said, especially when you're talking about school boards and getting involved locally, you're speaking my language there. I love that. Would you say that TPPA focuses mostly on local, or do you focus also on federal, or is it pretty balanced across the board?
Well, our local groups around the country, and by our local groups, what I really mean is the local groups. They're not ours. They voluntarily choose to be affiliated with us, and we do everything we can to support them. And I'm always very careful about that because we're a grassroots organization. I try not to take credit for the work that people do themselves. But as a national organization, we generally focus on what is happening in Washington, D.C. And we certainly are doing that, especially when it comes to the Corrupt Politicians Act and the Pelosi power grab with election integrity. And we'll do that even with critical race theory as we need to do so. But what we have seen since March of 2020 is that the local governments really decide they can impact how much freedom we live with in our day-to-day lives. And people have begun to be much more engaged, not just at an organizing level locally, but going and talking to their school boards, talking to their local governments, and working to hold them accountable. And I heard Senator Ron Johnson say this best when it comes to school boards. He said that people on the right and conservatives always talk and complain about how the left does such a good job of culture and the right seems to have ceded culture. And he says the thing is, we have ceded the number one most important place where culture is being influenced in this country, and it is what happens in schools for 13 years, 6 to 8 hours a day with our kids, and it's time to stop that. And I completely agree, and that's part of the reason why we're involved with school boards at this point.
So how do you think that the left got such a foothold in so many schools? I mean, because I know that not all, I mean, probably most teachers aren't teaching a lot of these things, but a lot are, enough to where we should be concerned. How do you think that they were able to even sneak the stuff in there in the first place?
Well, I don't know that I have the full answer on that. And there are going to be people who might be listening to this that say there are other people who are better experts at this than me. What I think is this: the left has always had a good relationship with the National Education Association, the teachers union, and they seem to advance their causes together. And they've done that for a long time. So they've been doing that at a local level around the country for years and years, and at a national level. And then as I've started peeling back and understanding more about diversity, equity, and inclusion specifically, it seems that sometime in around 2018, 2017, this became a push, and it started going into school districts around the country, and they started adopting maybe not as much diversity, equity, and inclusion, but really focusing on the word equity. And equity means equal outcome. It does not mean equality, which is equal opportunity. It's a very clever way to take something that we're familiar with, equality and equal opportunity, which we stand for in America, and make it sound very similar, but turn our ideas completely upside down. And as critical race theory is being taught in schools around the country, one of the things that it seeks to do is to create equity. And equity is equal outcomes. So it may be taking from one group and giving to another group to make them all equal. And I have just, as I've looked at local school boards around the country, it seems that push for equity really seemed to start becoming a hard push around 2017 and 2018.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, especially over the past few years, like you said, they have been pushing more for equity, and they know how to make it sound attractive because they don't tell you what it really entails. So, and this also ties into what you're saying about how the left has been able to take over the culture a lot in many ways through the classrooms. So let's dig into critical race theory a bit. So I asked this question of anybody who I'm speaking with on critical race theory, because I think a lot of people have different takes on what critical race theory is. Some are right, some are wrong, some are a little bit of both. But from what you've seen and what you've observed, how would you define critical race theory?
Well, it defines people in terms of being either oppressors or oppressed. So you're either a victim or you are an oppressor, and they make that determination largely based on the color of skin rather than on the content of character. And in doing that, whether it is deliberate or not, they wind up actually acting in a racist manner because they are looking at people based on the color of their skin and their outward appearance first and foremost, rather than what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, which is to look at the content of the character and to judge people individually based on who they are as individuals. And it seems to be that the reason to do this is not it isn't just to divide people, it is to really push for equity. So you take from one entire group of people and give to another to create equal outcomes. And I think critical race theory is a means to an end, and the end is that equitable society, which is truly Marxism or communism.
Yeah, and we do know that does have its roots in critical theory and the Frankfurt School. So there definitely is a pronounced Marxist influence here. The very foundation is Marxist. So when it comes to how these ideas are manifesting in the classrooms, can you give us some examples of that you have heard or have seen of how this of what this looks like in the classroom and how it's being practiced?
So what I have seen is that it can happen in many different ways. I just read an experience from one parent the other day where her children came home from school in first grade or kindergarten, and they were talking about how white people were oppressors. Mm-hmm. And this is from I believe that they have biracial children. And so she was very, very concerned about this because you've got a situation where you're even pitting parents against one another. You will see that there are teachers who are really pushing the different books, literature, especially modern literature that ties to critical race theorists in this country. Maybe it's not literature as much as it is current events and political books. So they'll make those part of the required reading. Kendi's book is one of the books that they will wind up doing. I think his book is called Marked, and he's got a book that is called Marked in it. It's for not just for adults, but he's got a version for teenagers and younger. And then we have heard instances where teachers are actually separating the students in the classroom based on race, and then making them sort of role play based on the separation that is based on race, which I'm not positive, but it certainly seems like that would actually be a violation of the Civil Rights Act, and you actually are engaged in racism at that point when you start separating people based on race. One of the things that concerns me so much about this is that if we're not careful, we're going to wind up going back where we were decades ago and have a segregated society, and it will be a neo-segregation, a new form of segregation. But I'm very concerned that we're headed back in the wrong direction rather than in a direction where we have learned from the lessons of the past and worked to improve upon what we did wrong in the past.
Gotcha. Yeah. I mean, and I've heard a lot of those examples too. What kind of feedback have you gotten from teachers? Because I know that not all teachers can actually be down with teaching this stuff, but are they being pressured, or what have you seen in what you've been doing?
Yeah, so I think that there are teachers who are fine with teaching this. It could be because this is what they learned in college, or they are leftists, so they're okay with it. Then there are other teachers who are not okay with it, but they're very afraid to step up and say anything. I know of an incident in the metro. I live in Metro Atlanta, in the Atlanta area, where there's a teacher who is very upset about the things that she is being taught and told to teach. And she is a single mom, and she is a child with a disability, and she's very concerned that if she speaks out, she will lose her job. And so she's afraid to, she's saying things behind the scenes, but she's afraid to speak out publicly. In the county where I live, Cherokee County, Georgia, I found out that in May, one of the people who works for the county did a podcast and talked about how they are implementing social emotional learning with equity. So they're calling it Selequity. SEL is social emotional learning, and they're merging it all together. So you've got social emotional learning, diversity, equity, and inclusion, social justice, all merged into one big, huge ball of mess. And in that podcast, he said that they had been teaching teachers at middle schools. They'd expanded to elementary schools, but the thing that was most concerning to me is that he seemed to indicate they were teaching counselors county-wide, and they had done a training session of counselors where they had the counselors address their privilege and address their positionality, and it may have been uncomfortable, but they needed to do this anyway. And those kind of trainings are some of what parents around the country now are trying to figure out. What is it that you're training the teachers to do? What is it that you're training the counselors to do? And are we in a situation where some of our teachers and counselors may actually be getting some of the woke training that we've heard from Fortune 500 corporations, sort of like what where I think it was Coca-Cola, but I may be wrong about the corporation, where they've said be less white. I don't think that's actually happening yet in schools, but addressing positionality, talking about privilege, it seems like they're skirting really close to that with the training that they're doing of teachers and counselors.
Yeah, and a friend of mine brought up a good point. I mean, if they're going to indoctrinate the children, they have to do the teachers first and teach them how to do it. So I'm hearing teachers complaining about being segregated themselves, just like what is happening with a lot of students. It's pretty scary. But when it comes to solutions for this, I mean, we've seen laws that have been passed banning it in certain states like Texas and Nebraska, Idaho, other places like that. Now, I'm of the opinion that I think that parents have the right to determine what material their children are being taught. I don't have an issue with it on that level. What I'm concerned about is that we might get into this mentality where we think that banning is the end all be all. I don't think that banning is really going to work as effectively as we think it does. So in your estimation, what are the best ways to prevent these ideas from CRT and other forms of woke theology from becoming dominant in the classroom?
Well, I can tell you flat out that the banning of this, the people who have been doing this, as I pointed out a little while ago, it's been going on since 2017 and 18, maybe even longer, where there's been a push for equity. It is seeped. It is in every aspect of some of the materials that I have researched. So it may not be. I'm trying to think of how to say this. It may not be that they're flat out saying trying to teach the 1619 project, but they are teaching they're implementing critical race theory. I think that you've got the teachings that you might get in law school about what is critical race theory and how does it work and what is it from a study, like studying the thoughts around critical race theory. and
Yeah, like
even the 1619 project. But then you back off of that and you see that the implementation in this push for equity, regardless of giving individualized education and making sure that each student has what the student needs based on what they need and what they excel at, and just grouping students together, that is happening. And to unwind that is going to take quite a bit of time. The other thing is that I do personally go, okay, where do we draw the line with banning certain things? We have to do that in a very wise way. I'm never in favor of burning books, so we have to do that in a wise way, and that you're giving age appropriate material to students. So I think that we have to do this. Here's what I think that the solutions are. You have to be engaged at your local school board level. You've got to research what is happening at your local school board, and you need to work with others around the country who are researching it, so that you don't have to go and start from a blank sheet of paper to figure out everything that is going on. And that's one of the things our organization is trying to do, is connect people so that we can kind of crowdsource some of what we're learning about what's happening in local schools. But then the other thing is that we need to make sure that students are good at reading and writing and arithmetic, and that they are learning history. I've never said don't teach history. You need to make sure that we do teach history and that we're teaching science in this country. But you can teach facts without putting political spin on it. And I think that's what we need to be advocating for. We advocate for teaching facts. We advocate for learning. We advocate to think critically and to teach students how to look at both sides of an issue and figure out what they believe and understand both sides of an issue. There's a difference in critical thinking and critical theory, and there's a difference in teaching versus indoctrination and putting political spin on facts. And I think it's very important that we are teaching facts and we're teaching how to think, and then we are not putting that political spin on it one way or the other. I don't want my spin on it. I don't want someone else's spin on it. I want students to get out of school and to be educated so that they can either go on to college or begin a career, and they can pursue their own American dream, and they have a sense of what they like and what they are good at, so they can start leaning in and building up their strengths and become experts in whatever they choose to do in their life.
Gotcha. Great answer. I mean, it does take a more concerted focus on, like you said, local politics. I love it. So yeah, we're just about out of time here. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find you?
So you can go to teapartypatriots.org, teapartypatriots.org to sign up with us, click through to attend school board meeting to learn more about how to do that. And then you can also either click through on there or just simply go to United We Stand Center, unitedwestandcenter.com. And that's where you can get the information that we have with our how-to guide about how to stand for content of character and against critical race theory, and we'll put more information on that relates to both what we stand for and what we are trying to stop in our country from the critical race theory standpoint at unitedwestandcenter.com.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you again for joining me. We got to do this again sometime. But yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Before I sign off, don't forget to head on over to libertynation.com, a proud sponsor of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles. You can sign up for the daily briefing or subscribe to the Member Zone, or you can just check out the latest cutting-edge conservative news and analysis with none of the spin and all of the nuance. Check out new and original material on libertynation.com. Conservative news where truth matters.